Now, some people say to me, my building's too old, it's too hard, it's too complex. And then I turn around and say, well, the Opera House is 6-star Green Star performance. If that beautiful dame can actually have that leadership, then lots of office buildings, there's huge amounts of opportunity in this space.
How did it saying the Opera House is 6-star? Like,
it's incredible, isn't it?
Was that a recent thing? Is that something they took
To their enormous credit, they've been working on this journey for a really long time.
Wow.
So what's exciting is if you say there's all these opportunities, you know, with a really complex building.
Yeah, and old.
Yeah.
And you've got a layer of heritage protection and public interest, and like you can't just slap some solar panels on there and call it a day.
Can you imagine the Opera House covered in solar panels? Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Facilities podcast.
Podcast where we talk about the insights, innovations and impacts of the FA ministry. My name's Tim.
And I'm Aaron. And today on the podcast we have Davina Rooney, the CEO of the Green Building Council of Australia. She spent her career at the intersection of sustainability and operations.
Yes, all right. And on this episode, we'll be talking about fit out waste and sustainability at scale. And
how a heritage icon like the Sydney Opera House has earned its 6-star Green Star rating. So that 10
6-star Green Star. Don't miss it.
Looking for the buyout then, just be open to change.
You're so good, you spread my wings. I actually had to learn to do it because the question
My brother had mushrooms growing in his car.
Fantastic spreadsheet is like gold.
Water starts pouring on me.
It's such a rewarding career.
Drag them down!
We love you all of our customers.
I'll let you take the lead on the start.
Oh, sure. Well, welcome. Do you want to have a talk to how Green Star obviously has evolved to date, but where it is? So your big vision this year ahead, we're talking the DFIT space, you've got a conference coming up next week, you've got a family, you've got everything happening everywhere all at once.
Everywhere, all at once, all at the same time.
Yes.
I mean, it's really helpful to start with the purpose of the Green Building Council, which is to partner with industry to drive the transformation of the built environment towards sustainability. So the whole aim for us is how do we get sustainability at scale everywhere, you know, and so there's a few things we do. We work with partners, we do education, we do advocacy, and then really importantly, as you say, Green Star, how we rate buildings. So for us, it's about how do we reach more of the sector. And so I think really important for us is we've been seeing huge growth with partnerships, working with the existing building space. Like, let's be really honest, when we actually look at this, what we do with existing buildings is so fundamental. Obviously, there's a huge number more existing buildings than anything else. They're the 99%. So how do we lean into that space, do it really well, and recognise all the fabulous people in facilities that are driving change?
And have you seen through wider education, do you see that market turning towards like the layman understanding, perhaps instead of knocking down, this refit is an option for me?
Hugely. Like I would actually say that market's changed. So it's really interesting to go back to where Green Star Performance started. It started because people were like, I have this fabulous existing building that I have humming, and I'd like to be able to be compared to the new one down the road. And so that idea of how do we actually sing the songs and talk about how fabulous it is, tuning up and absolutely working with buildings. Now, some people say to me, my building's too old, it's too hard, it's too complex. And then I turn around and say, well, the Opera House is 6-star Green Star performance. If that beautiful dame can actually have that leadership, then, you know, lots of office buildings, there's huge amounts of opportunity in this space.
How did it saying the Opera House is 6-star? Like,
it's incredible, isn't it?
Was that a recent thing? Is that something they took?
To their enormous credit, they've been working on this journey for a really long time.
Wow.
And so, you know, they take it so seriously in terms of polishing railings with olive oil.
Really?
Yeah.
To the nth degree.
You know,
that's
like
awesome.
what I mean
I only
is
just learned there, like the little tiles on the sails are self-cleaning.
To be honest, like there is lots of impressive things from the high-tech side to embracing, you know, country in the way that they, you know, honour our first Australians. There's like this beautiful, rich narrative. There's even an artificial reef that they've been working on for rehabilitation of marine life.
Oh, wow.
You know, so what's exciting is if you say there's all these opportunities, you know, with a really complex building.
Yeah, and old.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've got a layer of heritage protection and public interest, and like you can't just slap some solar panels on there and call it a day.
Can you imagine the Opera House covered in solar panels?
Well, there's something
that would be cool.
beautiful about it, but yeah, that is not their renewable strategy. You know,
I love that. I love that this feels like it's a long, well thought out.
Yeah.
piece.
And so when we actually look through what existing buildings can do, one of the reasons we work with the iconic, you know, when we were doing work in apartments, and we actually started working with an affordable provider, because we were like, if you can do it there and do it right, you can do it anywhere.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing with some of the iconic buildings. If you can do it in this complex environment, what's from stopping you doing it everywhere? And so what's changed? You know, people want to live in...
People want that.
People want that. They want to be in offices, or they want to be in spaces that reflect their values. So that's one of the big things that have changed. Investors want to see it in their portfolios. You know, so there's a lot more green finance in this area.
Yes.
You know, QIC did a $3.75 billion green bond that related to their use of existing buildings and performance certification in that area. So there's a huge opportunity for how we use these things to get towards scale. And then Tim, your great question earlier, how does it relate to not just how they operate the building, but how does it relate to fit outs? Because when we talk about facilities, I don't know, when I move houses, I think I still have a box from when I moved 8 years ago, because whenever anyone moves, you pack up your whole life and you kind of slowly shift it. That is not what happens when we do fit outs.
No.
We throw everything out and we buy sometimes the same things again.
Yeah.
And so we're launching our fit outs pathways, which are all about how do we drive more circularity in that space? How do we encourage people? How do we put it in the business case that you set it up to lease your furniture or think about it differently and work through the life cycle? Because
creates new business opportunity too, I would imagine.
That's what's super exciting. Like my favourite part is when I, you know, get to meet manufacturers who, or different innovative businesses that take product back, refurbish it, give it another life, or builders who have really innovative solutions in this space. That's what actually inspires me. Or going into, you know, really beautiful spaces that have been around for 10 years and having people really proudly talk about how they actually kept a lot of things and then actually, you know, set things up for the next phase. Now, why is that important? 30% of all office waste actually is fit out waste. Like, it's not small. It's quite big.
It's huge.
And so the thing for us to kind of think about is there's, you know, within the operational cycle, there's all these small things, but they're cumulative. And, you know, people that are leading on the facility side are often dealing with these challenges every day. And then, you know, new buildings. Back when I used to work in facilities, there'd be a stage where on the development team, they'd walk out the door and they'd throw the keys over their shoulder. We'd call it the key toss. You know, where they'd throw their keys to someone on the facility side who would desperately try to catch them.
And just go from there.
But that is, you know, that is not a soft landing. That is not optimal performance. That creates challenges. That creates performance gaps. That creates problems. How do we set everyone up to succeed?
Yes. Yeah. I can't tell you the amount of fit outs that we've done where you'll enter the space, it's delivered as a warm shell, you know, it's painted plasterboard, you know, everything's in, and then brand new carpet tiles down in an office fit out, and then it's not in the design of the fit out, so you're pulling up brand new carpet, thousands of square metres to then figure out what to do with. So it sounds like this is really gives a solution to that.
We you know, that's what we have to be doing. We have to find the complex problems. And where do we see these things? Nobody ever wants to create these issues. They're always at the interface of contracts. You know? And so who better in place in industry, in all of industry, who sees in the operational path more intersections wonderful facilities managers are often finding these problems or challenges. And like, what about me? How do we work this through? And so, I think as we work through complexity in existing buildings, now is the time to solve these problems.
Yeah. Well, and it's like the make good stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like you return it to to what it was, and then
the next person to think.
Tenant comes in and says, "I don't like that colour. Rip it all out."
Yeah. Literally. I mean, there are some great businesses out there that can, recycle that carpet or even some
Reuse
wine
it
or reuse.
Reduce, reuse, recycle.
But it isn't as, it's a small part of the market share.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess one of my favourite stories is we're in International Towers and we, leased a space for 5 years, then moved next door and it was property as a service. So literally the desks, the chairs, the everything, we just walked in with laptops and phones.
Yeah.
And when we moved over the weekend next door, because our size needs had changed.
Yeah.
And then it was able to be leased as a new fit out.
It's great. Similar to a build to rent model.
Yeah, so it's some of this property as a service kind of thinking. And, innovative facility solutions are right at the heart of it.
So is it sort of like a subscription model, basically, but for property and...
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it's really cool.
That's a really cool idea.
But what it kind of means is, you actually are leasing the desks, you're leasing the bookshelf, you're leasing things. And I have to say, as someone that runs, like a medium-sized entity, if you're less than 100 people, why would you want to do all of that? Why wouldn't you want to do it with the experts and have it done in a fairly seamless manner where everything lasts a whole lot longer?
Yeah, 100%.
And your expenses. You can forecast those expenses as well. It does make things a lot easier.
And then it's not on you to look after it either. It's like...
Well, to be honest, we had a conversation, like we're getting near the end of our lease coming up and for a relatively small organisation, the board was like, do you want to move? Do you want to go do a fit out somewhere else? And it was like, well, we can either do this strategic project or I can allocate those same people to move office for a year and do a whole, for your scale of organisation, you've got to put in all the thinking part of it as well. So, I love the way that different innovative facilities solutions can actually bring to better outcomes for customers and then have these great environmental benefits absolutely at the same time, bringing them together.
It wasn't until I heard you speak at the FMA conference last year, I'd always assumed that the Green Star stuff and the green building stuff was all to do with that fit out stage and the construction piece. I had no idea that it was also looked into the operational data post move in. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that, because I'm assuming most FMs would know that, but I didn't.
Well, I mean, for me, that's where a lot of the magic happens, right? Because, you want to see the results.
Yeah.
You want to see things get better. And so, when I look at something like Green Star Performance, it is set up as a ladder to climb.
Yes.
So your first stage, you set up your policies, you set up your procedures, then you start committing to taking them across your portfolio and get all your data in the right place. And then after you've had them in for a few years, you should start be seeing huge amounts of impact. So I'll give like a really practical example of that. You want to get on top of things with your waste. You really need to put in what are we going to do? Yeah. You put a policy in place and then you need to get it in your waste contract. And then you need to transition that over and it'll take you a year to get data.
Yeah.
What does that look like? That's a 3-year cycle. What's the challenge in portfolios? Everyone's busy. Yeah. And there's lots of stuff happening. How do you, and then the other thing that's really interesting when we do performance verification for people over time, sometimes they'll go, we fixed that waste contract. And you'll look at it and you go, I can't find it. Be like, that contract change, that somehow got lost on the way through.
And
so
I'm sure it makes it
measurement
tricky
matters.
as well with there's such high turnover in a lot of FM roles.
Yeah.
So even just maintaining records and stuff like that is tricky, but maintaining a
strategy over a longer, and so how do you set up a ladder to climb where you actually verify where you're up to and then support and reward people on the way through?
And so for facility managers, those policies that they develop internally sits within their Green Star or Green Building Council associated pathway.
Yep.
So the incoming or the incumbent facility manager can sort of log in and see where they're up to and go from there.
That's the kind of the plan of trying to set these things up so they work. Like, I think often what you see is the policies are held with sometimes a national role, and then ideally they roll out through their contracts at scale, and then they get implemented at each of the projects. And then, usually they're deeply involved working with the tenants and partners to see those things land and then get the results as they roll through their buildings. But, the most passionate people you'll meet about getting outcomes are often facility managers.
Yeah. How do you find, like, a lot of facility managers that I talk to often talk about the frustrations they have where they inherit a space or they inherit a policy that was decided by an ESG team or a HR team. They get given this thing and say make it work. And they're looking at it going, well, that's not fit for purpose. So how am I meant to maintain that? This policy it's not speaking my language. How can FMs get more involved in the shaping of these policies?
Yeah, and done right, they should be.
Yes.
Back when I was lucky enough to run the CapEx budgets for Stockland, like quite a while ago, and sit in the operations team. And what you should be doing is on your national ops calls, how do we all feel about this? How would we set that up? What would we like that to look like? So the best policies often come from an operational need. So when I used to sit in a national ops role, I would know that I had gotten the national policy right if one of our top FMs went, oh, I have a spreadsheet to do that. Like, I try and calculate that for my site. So what you're often trying to do is take those icons, take those lighthouses on the hill, and then put them in a framework so everyone can access it. So every single site in the portfolio doesn't need to have that discussion and debate. Because even the best idea, if it isn't in someone's maintenance contract, it's unlikely to get systemically done over the life of the asset. But I totally agree. It's absolutely a partnership. It can't be an ivory tower in the assets. So some of the most beautiful stories that I've heard of people using some of the performance frameworks are sometimes like a council that's really used it as a ladder to climb. And they've actually put some of that framework in their thinking, oh, there's an idea, and then used it to bring through with their teams. But it's got to be a team sport. It has to involve everyone with the thinking about doing things, and it needs to have operational thinking. How does it fit in my cycle of my contracts? How does it fit in with where my tenants are? How does it fit in with how I'm going to deliver this?
There's a whole education process as well when you're bringing in new tenants about what they're signing up to and getting that buy-in.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, in my experience, I really appreciated that with Green Star and with the Green Building Council that you could call. There was someone that you could call and discuss, in my contract I've signed up to, a responsible waste contractor, or we're going to have 7 different cycles of waste, let's say, in our building. But I'm not quite sure exactly, is this right? Do we have the right amount of bins? Do we have glass recycling in our waste rooms? Those sort of questions that facility managers maybe they inherit a pathway that they don't know the ins and outs of. There's someone that they can call and work through with.
And so one of the things that we try to set up and that they receive points for is at the end of buildings doing like a how the facility should work handover manual. So it's not the key toss.
And it's not a checkbox either.
Yeah, it's a transition, or thinking of those pathways for how do you educate your tenants and bring them in. What should the waste rooms look like? How are they set up? And like a big one is for the new buildings, we actually ask for how you're tracking it over the first year. Because if you actually don't hand over information, don't set them up, they don't quite work as they're expected. So like a research report we did on the performance gap, 15 years ago, it'd be 12 years ago, a research report was done showing that there was a reasonable performance gap between what buildings were doing and what they were meant to be doing. Something that was really exciting was we did that again in 2021 in the office market. Now, noting that Green Star asks you to go back and track. You get points, you're required to go and check the building over time. The exciting thing was we found that around 90% of the buildings were within a half-star neighbours of what they'd been designed to.
Wow.
Now, noting that it's often got a buffer, right? You often, and so it's kind of where you wanted it to be, which is actually really reassuring.
Yeah.
And then when we got into the 10% where they didn't, something had happened. You know, they were...
There was a reason.
There was a reason. It had been sold and it wasn't occupied the same way, or there'd been a change of use, or there'd been, there was logical kind of reasons. There wasn't, there was very few. We ran the building the way we intended. We tracked it through and didn't get there.
Yes.
What was quite, and where there was a neighbours commitment agreement, which is even more formalised, 95% of the projects got there.
Wow.
So what does that
Amazing.
tell us? Well-designed projects where we hand things over right and track them through, we can actually get amazing outcomes. And so we actually had an academic group peer review it and publish a paper with us on it to, look at the data different ways to show what's possible in the facility side, which for those of us that have been in the game a while, it's quite heartening to see that all these good intentions are then translating into these pathways.
Yes.
But then you spend a lot of your time thinking, well, how do we get the rest of the sector there who started from a different place?
Yes.
Yeah. And it can be a really competitive space amongst FMs. I remember having a call one day from one of a building manager that works with us, and she's like, I want to use your method of carpet cleaning. We need to sit down and talk about how it's innovative and it's different to what the rest are doing, because I need this. I need this to help us bolster our green strategy. And I'm like, okay, should we be doing something? She said, no, because I don't want anyone else to be on it. I'm like, oh, this is really a competitive
But how do we
space.
create a race to the top? And yes, there is a green cleaning pathway in these frameworks that's incentivising better. Now,
I love that, race to the top.
We would always encourage sharing because it is meant to be a race to the top. It's not meant to be race
They
up.
wanted to be first to market, but I think then they share. But they like to be first to market.
Yeah. Which, to be honest, that's what people ask me, so Australian property gets recognised on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. It gets recognised by GRESB as, globally high performing. Yeah. People ask me, how did we become the Goldilocks market? And I say, a few things. One, we're a large enough market to have scale. Yeah. But we're a small enough market that if you need to agree things, you can lock everyone in a very big boardroom or a podcast room and, nut things out. And then the other thing is we spend a lot of time trying to work on the frameworks and standards and then, agree what the race course looks like. And then try and beat each other around it. Yeah. So there's a healthy part of what's shared and then what's competitive that actually leads to this race to better.
How do you remain optimistic when, the current climate or political climate can be, times are a little bit more difficult financially for the world, and then often the things that are new and difficult, like sustainability for someone that is new to the space, can often fall to the wayside to, well, gas is cheaper, well, let's just stick it how it is because bottom line is what it is. But while you're surging forward, trying to do better and push a race to the top Australia-wide, how do you remain optimistic amongst that?
Yeah, and so I think one of the things when we look at this space is we've got to look at how far we've come.
Yeah.
The Australian office market is considered to be one of the fastest decarbonising markets in the world. When you look at the projections of neighbours and what that's driven.
Every time someone says neighbours, I just think of neighbours. Everybody needs good.
There you go.
I'm just like, what are we talking about here?
Well, what we're talking about is measuring performance over time and monetising it.
Yeah.
And so, I do absolutely acknowledge that it's a complex marketplace, but one of the things we look at is the World Economic Forum risk trends. What are people really worried about over the next 10 years?
Yeah.
And the things that everyone in the world is worried about is the things we're worried about. They're worried about climate change. They're worried about extreme events. They're worried about biodiversity. They're worried about resources.
Yeah.
We've got to say that we know where we're heading over the long term, but we're very distracted in the short term.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And so one of the challenges for all of us and facility managers for the whole, context is how do we head to where we need to be long term whilst being distracted in the short term?
Yeah.
And so I think, for many of us, it's looking at, some of the co-benefits of these things. Like there are huge energy savings. There's a huge amount of green finance buy-in. There's a huge amount of investor buy-in. There's a lot of, now, has the way we've talked about these things changed in the current climate? Yeah, quite possibly. But our long-term goals are the same and we've got to continue to march towards them. So, I don't know, you're probably speaking to someone who's, spent, at the Green Building Council, we launched a new tool full of electrification whilst Australia was in that gas-led recovery in 2019. So, it's about doing the research for what's the right pathway, how do we set industry up to succeed, and how do we work through that together?
Yes.
Talking about electrification and gas, like for FMs that are managing gas boilers and stuff in their build, like what's the hard truth for them, like over this next little while? Because things are changing.
Things are changing and things are changing radically.
Rapidly.
We have government tenders out that want fully electrified buildings.
Yeah.
Now, what does that mean in a facilities context? It means pulling out your CapEx plans, looking at when things are end of life, doing deep technical reviews to see when it will be the right time and pathway for your buildings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, these things are complex.
Yeah.
So, however, people often say the first view is, oh my goodness, can we make it fit? Like heat pumps take up more space than gas boilers. I was with some of our friends and partners at Stiebel Eltron, and they actually were doing a replacement of a gas boiler for heat pumps. Now, what was fascinating was the first view was we'll never be able to fit it in. There won't be that opportunity. And then they actually looked at how much of the equipment, how it was actually operating.
Yep.
And they were using less than half the installed capacity.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's just so efficient.
And then it was more efficient. It had been oversized at the start.
Yeah.
So there was breaking off that piece, looking at the actual usage in context. And then the second piece, they got down to like nearly 25% of the original installed capacity.
Wow.
So like spending, like for like is not your friend in these CapEx installs. Even, back when I was doing, big chiller upgrades, we're able to remove entire chillers, in large sites by doing optimized engineering to see what the best solution is. So there's lots of cases where, through smart early reviews, you can get the right solution at the right time. What's the big thing? Having a plan.
Yes.
For a facilities manager, looking at who your tenants are, what their requirements are for the next lease cycle comes over. Lots of them are really happy to work with you, but they need to know that there is a plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of tenants out there will look to rent a space that has green energy in place. And not just a green energy electricity plant, more than that, the green energy infrastructure within your building. Because it makes a difference to their internal reporting.
Yeah. And so that's one of the other things. I think we're going to see a lot more engagement over time, or speaking to people in the facility size, we're seeing a lot more where tenants are saying to the building owner, I now have to do reporting of my scope 3. You're my scope 3. Where's the data?
Yeah.
And so, as someone who 15 years ago, maybe a little longer, ran a tenant engagement session that no one was very interested in.
What do you mean we're going to swap out gas?
But now they're running out of time.
Now it's on their clock.
Yeah.
So I do think that this world is changing and there's lots of different opportunities and tenant engagement has changed.
Big time.
How do you help people move from the mentality of doing less harm to doing more good?
Yeah. That's a big one, right?
That's a great question.
That's a really big one. And so one of the things we have to do is have a vision for the world that we want in the future.
Yeah.
Where are we heading? Yeah.
That's where you need to start. So we're launching a nature roadmap. We spent our time looking at what we'd committed to as a country. which is kind of do net less harm by 2030 and moving towards restoration by 2050.
Yeah.
And so we're like, how do we actually break that down into what would you do in planning? What would you do in your material selection? What would you do in circularity to kind of bring that down? But I think we have to have a vision for better when we design these things. And so for us, that means looking at things in the nature space, that's really looking at circularity, that's looking at. So I think the thing we've got to do though is some people get very binary. If it's not restorative beyond this, then I'm going to do nothing.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a baseball game. We don't get to lose an innings and then kind of start again. It's kind of this stage where, we're joking about everything all at once, all at the same time. We've got to do everything we know how to do at the moment.
Yeah.
And then plan for what we're doing more in the future. So often I describe our role to people and I say it's kind of to read the global tea leaves of what's happening in the big board sustainability world, relate it to Australian property. And if we know how to do it now, we should be putting that in a framework and sharing that with everybody to just implement over a period of time. And if we're still learning, we should be doing thought leadership in this space, whether it's the circularity work, the nature work we're doing. And when we have pieces of that we understand, we should bring it back into the frameworks.
Yeah.
So the challenge for us is we've got to whistle while we walk. We've got to do all the less harm over here. And then every time we have an opportunity to break into better, we need to take that at every stage.
Yeah.
But I think we've got to make sure we don't get stuck in a paradigm that I can't do everything, so I'm going to do nothing.
Yep.
And I think, you talk about some of the negative thinking cycles that we hear externally. One of the beautiful things I saw, when someone was actually one of those advocates who was creating no waste, and someone said, wow, you're amazing, I just can't be like you. And they actually say, actually, we need 1,000 times more people moving towards where I am, rather than, a pure example standing at the outside that everyone's so intimidated by they don't do anything. So, it's really, we've got part of transforming the industry is taking everyone with us, because if you speak to one of those facility managers and they're like, they're all the way over there, I'm never going to get this building there, I should just.
Yeah, and a lot of the time it's like in their head, like we know what the right thoughts are or how we should be thinking, but then it's translating that to our heart, like what do I actually believe about this world? What do I want for my world in 30s? What do I want for my children's world and my grandchildren's world? And that takes that from just being this mental thing into the heart and then...
And there's a job, though, for people like us to make it a little bit bite-sized.
Yeah.
To make it easier. How do we take friction out of the system? Think of facility managers. They're awesome, but they're answering the phone. They're receiving requests on every other side. I learned a real lesson. I was doing an education webinar with one of our teams, and someone's like, I've got to go. There's a car on fire outside. Retail, it happens. Or someone had been kidnapped at an asset. These things, they happen.
They do. Facility managers are the ones you can never really, you can have a meeting booked in with someone, you can have them booked in to come to a podcast and
but
something's
there can
happened.
be really complex
or 2 in the
things.
morning and a pipe's burst.
Yeah. There's very
flood.
complex things, and it's never been more complex.
No.
So how do you, they say if you want something done, ask a busy person. Perfect on the facility side.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we've got to acknowledge that this is one more thing on their books, and yes, they care about it. The thing that I love, though, about sustainability in facilities is that I think it's the secret sauce for a lead indicator for quality. So the facility managers that are best at managing their energy, their water, that really care about the indoor air quality, that really lean into that space, you'll often find that they have great relationships with their customers. They're really good on the cleaning side, their lifts are really sharp, their compliance stuff is there. Why is that super interesting? Because the sustainability data is like a lead indicator. You can see it pretty quickly, whereas most of the other things are lag indicators. You find out after you have an accident or an incident.
Ben spills the coffee again.
Yes, yeah.
So the thing that I love is it can be one of the few ways at a portfolio level that you can really see and lean into scale.
I love that.
What I love as well is, and I never really thought about coming from a facility manager, but the policies that they do bring in and oversee in the building is how it filters into the tenants' lives.
Yeah.
I used to work, we had an office in a co-working building on Church Street, and they had this Keep Cup competition, right at the cusp of when everyone was drinking Keep Cups. We all had 20 Keep Cups. But it was just...
That's not the most sustainable choice, is it?
It's not the most sustainable choice. I only had one.
You'll be pleased to know my cup is in my bag.
There you go.
There you go.
Well done. But it was this, who can last the longest without taking, a single-use coffee cup and just keep using and it was this like tally within the building and trying to get everyone just to educated around that. And then that branches out into, where am I putting my waste in the right bin, or should I charge this, should I not? It filters through some of the big decisions that you make for your facility. It does make a difference in everyone's lives. Well, I think that's probably why everyone's now getting invested in batteries and solar with their houses.
But it's that gamifying anything always helps something become more successful.
We're a competitive country.
Yeah.
But it's also what are the touch points that people listens to.
Yes.
I always say that, people talk a lot about company culture, but company culture can be the difference between what you say and what people see.
Yes.
And so I'd say operations, facilities, embedding of that. That's the core part where people see, they're the touch points they see.
Yeah.
And so if companies talk about things, that's where it's, really critically
important
involved.
to us.
This is important to us. Well, I'm going to the bins and seeing how important it is to you, or, I'm seeing if the building's lit up at light, are the lights on when no one's home, that kind of feeling.
Yes.
And so it's a role where culture's on display.
Yeah.
I hate when I'm walking through the city at 11 p.m. and I see office buildings with lights and I'm just like, why? Why? It's
it's a lot better than it used to be.
It is, yeah. Daily systems have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
It's like an auto light sensor.
Yeah. Yeah. Just make better choices. How can FMs be proactively auditing their buildings to make sure that their buildings are resilient and surviving climate change, not just...
It's a really important question. We're seeing it more and more. If you're in Brisbane and you're talking with people about assets, they'll tell you about what happened in the floods.
Yeah.
The first round, and then they'll tell you the second round. They'll tell you about which operations actually changed, put in floodgates, changed their operation, who was organised for it.
And who was ready the second time round.
Who was ready the second time, So I think one of the things that the first thing you've got to do, and it's a requirement in our frameworks, but it's just a good thing to think about anyway, is what are the risks? What is going to happen? Yeah. And there's a bunch of practical tools out there at the moment, or at a portfolio level having a view. And often, the big portfolios will have had a look, but the question is, has everyone chatted up and down the line to be ready for that? And so,
Yeah, that's important.
One of the things that you'll hear, for example, is people know their key risk is a power shutdown, but someone forgot to check the backup generator and it didn't quite switch over when that moment happened. So I think running through the key things you're trying to manage at a building, which will obviously be different if you're on the Brisbane waterfront, to if you're in another location. So
you're in a bushfire zone,
Yeah. Well, so how did I become really interested in this? Back when I worked for a large property group, there was a cyclone, and one of the shopping centres was being used for evacuation.
Wow.
And then, you have a whole community there.
Yep.
And thankfully everything went to plan. But unsurprisingly, we started working with James Cook University about screwing down the roofs more.
Yep.
After that, putting in satellite phones. So how will you communicate? What are some of your key risks? And then, fascinatingly, we did a review around the portfolio, particularly for things with wind, and we're looking at what's a really practical thing I can do and put in the CapEx budget. Tying down of equipment on rooftops, particularly in areas like that. So going through just all the practical things that you can do, and doing a big setup for that. Your sites will thank you for it long term.
Yeah.
But it all starts with asking a question. And the thing that you will find is the leading facility managers actually have quite a good inkling of that. You know, they'll be telling you about, the water issue we had and here's how we manage it. And, you know, checking those things go in a schedule or someone's contract. So we check them regularly and we check that they're checked. So, you know, I think actually considering that. And then also another huge thing in facilities is they become retreat locations. If it's really hot, everyone goes to the shopping centre.
Yes.
No, like...
That was every summer for me growing up. We're going to the movies all day.
But also just things like if you're running a retirement living facility, the key thing is like, what is your plan if you're going to have, where are you going to have backup power? Where's everyone's medicine going to go?
Yeah.
You know, so thinking through what are the key risks for your assets. And you'll find really great facilities teams are quite tuned on to this. I would actually say that some of these climate risk frameworks are a really good pathway for them to get access to support for often things that have been keeping them up worrying in the middle of the night.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I was only just in my local shopping centre the other night. We all got evacuated 15 minutes into a movie.
Oh.
And you'll never guess
movie.
which shopping centre it was.
What?
Northland. the drive-through shopping centre.
I'm shocked.
It's just had emergency after emergency after emergency, that shopping centre. But they're learning how to handle their assets well.
Oh my gosh.
We were all evacuated very efficiently. Yeah.
So is that something that you would recommend constant, like maybe a biannual or annual sort of taking stock of where things are? Like
So usually, like the really great way to do it is to get a desktop climate resilience plan. Like, what are the things you're worried about?
Yeah, okay.
You know, so for example, in the bushfires, a thing that many of us discovered was a lot of our fire systems, when there's a certain amount of smoke in the air, acted like the fire was indoors. And we're trying to evacuate people, alarms were going off because there was so, you know, so you've got to know what your issues are. And then what I'd recommend is that you start putting them in your CapEx, you know, like anything. Get it in a plan, put it, and then check how you're going against that plan. So it's one of the things that we put in the Green Star performance framework to remind someone first to get a plan and then ask them at a stage how they're going implementing the plan. So that kind of reminding you to connect back.
Well.
Yeah, because I mean, as you know, a plan is only as a plan on a shelf.
Yeah, I've been writing a book for like 7 years.
Yeah, it's only as good as
the
people who are actually reading it and enacting it.
However, this is, you know, controversial for thought. This is where long-term forecasts are really good. You know, like not everyone loves LTFs for CapEx in these plans, but if you actually take one of those things and you put them in over the years and you knock them over at a year at a time, and then when you go to do your next capital budget, you pick up the thing and tick it off. You know, a combination of that and some of the proactive maintenance, it can, you know, you can really move where you are over time.
Yeah. It's like trading and investing, right? Like there's you invest long term because you know you can get some real good wins, but you can do some short term things to get some significant stuff as well happening. Yeah, I love that.
Some of its parts.
Yeah. What are 2 or 3? Oh, you might not be able to say. But what are 2 or 3 legislative changes that are going to land on some FM's desks over the next few years? What's coming up? What's on the horizon in this space?
Yeah. So look, I think there's a few things coming up. So we're having a big conversation about the National Construction Code, and actually, you know, so the National Construction Code for 2025 was just approved by ministers last year. It's slowly moving through the works. So you'll see that coming through in all new buildings. And so I think, you know, that's one of the things we'll see. Another thing that we're seeing out of government is their procurement requirements. Okay. You know, so their procurement requirements, the Australian Public Service Net Zero in government operations, or the New South Wales government has their own, you know, operational requirements where they're asking for higher sustainability standards.
Yeah.
That's great, leading the way.
Yeah. The other thing that I think we'll start seeing is the corporate requirements for sustainability reporting and procurement mean that people have to get deeper and deeper into their data sets and start asking more about their customer scope 3, starting to get their head around all of those things. So and then I think the other thing that we're seeing is there's going to be a lot more focus on refrigerants over a period of time. Then there's going to be a lot more focus on how we do electrification and then refrigerants. So like, what am I seeing a spectrum? There's going to be more and more interest in the sustainability side. For facility managers. And so what does that look like? Having, you'll hear me say a lot, have a plan in the space and then be slowly working through. But what does it mean? People that have been really focused on running efficient buildings in a way that's healthier for their tenants and partners, that will get more recognition as we go forward into the future.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
It is exciting. Better world. Hey.
One building at a time, right?
Building at a time.
Fantastic.
That's it. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything that you would, like, piece of advice or anything you'd love to say to the FMs that you haven't had a chance to say?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, like, honestly, we actually talk about who makes it happen. There's a study from the Warren Centre, and it actually sort of says that the efficiency gains you can get out of a good facility manager who's leading in this space are as much sometimes as you can get out of capital savings. So they were like over half a star. And it was at the time. So what does that mean? We need to say thank you to all the leaders who've been implementing these changes. Thank you for your ideas. They're often the ones coming up saying, what's happening with this warm shell? Why do we have it? How can we do it differently? How can we do defit differently? So I would say thank you for all you've done in the sector. Thank you for your passion, and keep leaning in. There's a lot more for all of us to do together.
They really are the unsung heroes, aren't they?
They certainly
of
are.
Facilities.
100%.
Thank you so much for
No
coming
worries.
on.
It's an honour.
It's been so good.
How fun.
That was fantastic.
All right, well, I look forward to listening to more of the pod and keep making fabulous episodes bringing this space to the world.
Thank you.